The air inside the old community hall was thick and heavy, carrying the mixed scent of floor wax, dust, and the faint, sweet smell of perfume that always seems to linger where crowds gather. It was a chilly afternoon, the kind where the gray light outside struggles to push through the tall, grime-streaked windows. Inside, rows of folding metal chairs creaked as people shuffled their feet, finding their seats. There was a low, constant hum of whispers, the sound of coats being rustled, and the occasional sharp cough of an older person trying to clear their throat. It was just a normal Saturday for most of the people in the room. A casual outing to a local talent show where neighborhood kids would show off whatever skills they had been practicing. Backstage, however, the world was completely different. Here, the lights were dimmer, and the air felt even closer, almost suffocating. In the narrow space behind the heavy velvet curtains, a young girl sat on a wooden crate. Her name was Maya, and at just 9 years old, she looked incredibly small against the backdrop of the tall black curtains and the clutter of music stands and cables. She wore a simple dress, a soft blue color that reminded her mother of a summer sky, though Maya herself would never know that comparison. Her legs hung off the crate, swinging slightly back and forth, her patent leather shoes clicking together softly. She wasn't nervous in the way most people get nervous, sweating and pacing. Instead, she was very still. She sat with her back straight and her hands resting quietly in her lap, her fingers twitching every now and then, as if they were playing invisible keys. Maya had been blind since she was a baby. For her, the world wasn't made up of shapes or colors or the worried looks on people's faces. Her world was built entirely from texture and sound. Right now, the texture was the rough wood of the crate under her legs and the smooth fabric of her dress. The sound was the overwhelming chaos of the backstage area. She could hear a teenager a few feet away tuning a violin, the screech of the strings making her flinch slightly. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the organizers walking past. She could hear the muffled roar of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. It sounded like the ocean, a vast breathing monster that she was about to face alone. Her mother knelt down in front of her. Bringing her face level with Maya's, the mother reached out and gently took Maya's cold hands in her own warm ones. She didn't say anything at first. She just rubbed the back of Maya's hands with her thumbs, a silent gesture of comfort that they both understood. Maya turned her head slightly, tilting her ear toward her mother. She knew that smell anywhere it was lavender soap and the unique warmth that belonged only to her mom. "Are you ready?" her mother asked softly. Her voice was low and calm, trying to hide any anxiety she might have been feeling. She knew that if she sounded worried, Maya would pick up on it immediately. Blind children often become experts at reading voices. Hearing the tiny shakes and tremors that sighted people try to hide, Maya nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was small, but steady. "I know the notes. I know them in my fingers." "I know you do," her mother replied, brushing a stray hair away from Maya's forehead. "Just remember what we talked about. Don't rush. Listen to the piano. Let it sing for you." "I will," Maya said. The piece she was about to play was not a simple nursery rhyme or a pop song. It was Dmitri Shostakovich's Second Waltz. It was a complicated piece of music, full of sadness and joy all mixed together. It was music that demanded respect, music that usually required a level of maturity and experience that a 9-year-old simply shouldn't have. But Maya loved it. She loved the way the rhythms moved like a dance that swept her up and carried her away. She had spent months learning it, her hands moving over the keys until the muscle memory took over and the music became a part of her. The organizer, a man with a deep booming voice that seemed to vibrate through the floor, walked by and looked at his clipboard. "You're up next, Maya," he said, not unkindly but loudly. "They're finishing the introduction now." Akea felt her stomach drop. It was that familiar flutter, like a bird trapped inside a cage made of ribs. It wasn't that she didn't want to play. She loved playing more than anything in the world. It was the uncertainty of it all. She couldn't see the crowd to know if they were friendly or bored. She couldn't see the piano until she touched it. Every performance was a leap of faith into the dark. Her mother squeezed her hands one last time and then stood up. "I'll be right here when you finish," she said. "Go show them." Maya slid off the crate and stood up. She smoothed down the front of her blue dress with her palms, a nervous habit. She took a deep breath, trying to fill her lungs with air to settle the fluttering in her chest. She reached her hand out into the empty space in front of her until her fingers brushed against the rough fabric of her mother's sleeve. Then she let go. She began to walk toward the side of the stage. She walked carefully, counting her steps. 1, 2, 3. She knew exactly how many steps it took to get to the edge of the curtain. As she got closer, the noise from the audience got louder. She could hear the announcer speaking, his voice booming over the speakers, introducing her. He said her name. He mentioned her age. She heard a small ripple of murmurs go through the crowd when he said she was blind. It was a sound she had heard before, a mixture of surprise and pity. She didn't want their pity. She wanted to give them something beautiful. She waited in the wings, just behind the heavy curtain. The announcer finished his speech, and the crowd applauded. It was a polite, scattered applause, the kind of sound people make when they are waiting for the next thing to start. Maya felt a cool draft from the stage doorway hit her face. It smelled like old wood and microphones. Then it was time. Maya stepped out from the darkness of the wings and into the lights. Even though she couldn't see them, she could feel the heat of the spotlights beating down on her face. It was a sudden, intense warmth that made her blink behind her dark glasses. The roar of the crowd seemed to change the moment she appeared. The polite clapping faded away quickly, placed by a hush that fell over the room like a heavy blanket. She walked to the center of the stage. She didn't walk with a cane today. She had memorized the layout of the stage earlier that afternoon. She moved with a slow, deliberate confidence. She could feel the vastness of the room around her. To her, the empty space in front of her wasn't just air. It was pressure. It felt like walking underwater. She could sense the presence of hundreds of people, all staring, all waiting. She could feel their eyes on her, a physical weight that pressed against her skin. It was a terrifying feeling, but it was also electric. She reached the piano. It was a large, imposing instrument, a shiny black beast that dominated the center of the stage. Maya reached out her hands until she found the edge of the bench. She ran her hand along the smooth wood until she found the middle. Then she sat down. She adjusted the distance, sliding the bench forward just an inch or two, just the way she liked it. She lifted the lid of the keyboard, sound of the hinge clicking echoing loudly in the silent room. For a moment, she just sat there. She placed her feet on the pedals, feeling the cold metal against her thin shoes. She hovered her hands over the keys, not touching them yet, just sensing the space where they were. The silence in the hall was absolute now. No one coughed. No one whispered. It was as if the entire room had stopped breathing, waiting to see what this small girl in the blue dress would do. Maya closed her eyes behind her glasses and took one last deep breath, centering herself, letting the fear drain out of her and onto the floor. She wasn't just a blind girl anymore. She was a musician. And the music was waiting. The transition from the dusty, cluttered wings to the center of the stage felt like stepping into a different planet. For most children, walking across a stage while hundreds of people stare is scary enough. For Maya, it was an exercise in pure trust and heightened senses. She didn't have the comfort of seeing where she was going. She couldn't see the edge of the stage or the shiny black piano waiting for her in the middle of the spotlight. She had to rely on the rehearsal she had done an hour earlier, counting the steps in her head and keeping her body straight. As she walked slowly forward, the air changed. Backstage, the air was stale and cool, but out here, under the lights, it was warm and close. The heat from the spotlights beat down on the top of her head and her shoulders, making the fabric of her blue dress feel slightly warmer against her skin. It was a comforting heat in a way, like a blanket, but it also made her very aware of how exposed she was. She knew that everyone in the room was looking at her. She could feel the weight of their gaze pressing against her, heavy and expectant. It wasn't a bad feeling, but it was a powerful one. It felt like standing in a strong wind, but instead of blowing her over, it was holding her in place. She walked with her hands slightly out from her sides. Just a little bit, not enough to look awkward, but enough to feel the air if she got too close to something. Her shoes made soft squeaking sounds on the wooden floor. To her, These sounds were loud, echoing in her ears. But she knew that to the audience, they were probably swallowed up by the size of the room. She focused on her breathing, keeping it slow and steady. Asterisk, in and out. In and out. Asterisk, she counted her steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She knew the piano was roughly 10 steps ahead. When she reached the number 9, she slowed down. She reached her left hand out cautiously, her fingers searching through the empty air. She expected to hit the hard, smooth wood of the piano bench. For a split second, her hand touched nothing but air, and a tiny spike of panic shot through her chest. It was that feeling you get when you reach for a doorknob in the dark and miss it. But she kept her arms steady and took one more small half-step. Her fingertips brushed against the cool velvet covering of the bench. Relief washed over her. She had found it. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Maya turned carefully and positioned herself in front of the bench. She didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she used her hands to feel the shape of the piano, locating the keyboard lid and the edge of the keys. She wanted to make sure she was perfectly centered. This was her ritual. It was her way of introducing herself to the instrument. She ran her hand along the smooth edge of the black and white keys, feeling the coldness of the ivory and the slight bump of the sharps and flats. It was a familiar feeling, like holding the hand of an old friend. She knew every dip, every scratch, every imperfection of the specific piano as she touched the keys. A hush fell over the crowd. If someone had been watching closely, they would have seen the change in Maya's posture. When she first walked out, her shoulders were slightly hunched, defensive against the vastness of the room. But as soon as her fingers made contact with the piano, she straightened up. She pulled her shoulders back and lifted her chin. The scared little girl seemed to disappear. In her place was a young musician who was ready to work. The silence in the hall was strange. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was a heavy, crowded silence filled with hundreds of people holding their breath. Maya could feel the pressure of it in her ears. It made her own heartbeats sound louder, like a drum thumping inside her chest. But strangely, as she sat there, the silence stopped feeling scary. It started to feel like a canvas. It was a blank space, waiting for her to fill it. The darkness that she lived in every day suddenly felt useful. It was her own private space where the music could grow before she let it out into the world. She adjusted the bench, sliding it forward just an inch, listening to the soft scrape of the metal legs against the floor. She lifted her feet and found the pedals. She pressed the sustain pedal down gently, just to test it, hearing the dampers lift inside the piano. She lifted it quickly. Thump. The sound rang out clearly. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, thinking she was starting, but she was just testing. Maya took a moment to listen to the room. She couldn't see the people, but she could hear them breathing. She could hear the rustle of a coat sleeve over on the left side. She could hear the distinct sound of a baby sleeping on the right. She could hear the creak of old floorboards as someone shifted their weight. All these sounds were like landmarks on a map. They told her exactly where she was. She was in the center of a circle of people. She was the focus point. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment and wiped her palms on her dress. Her hands were sweating a little bit from the nerves. She wanted them to be dry so they wouldn't slip on the keys. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs completely, imagining the air going all the way down to her toes. She pictured the music in her head. She didn't see notes on a page like other musicians. She saw shapes and colors. The second waltz was a deep, royal blue in her mind, with swirls of gold that moved fast and then slow. It felt like a thick ribbon that she could hold in her hands. She was ready, slowly. She lifted her hands from her lap and placed them over the keyboard. Her left hand hovered over the lower notes, ready to set the rhythm. Her right hand drifted higher, waiting for the melody. She didn't strike the keys immediately. She paused there, hovering, letting the anticipation build. She could feel the crowd leaning in. She could almost feel their curiosity reaching out to her. They were wondering what a blind child could possibly do with a piano. They were waiting to see if she would be good, or if they would have to clap politely just to be nice. Maya didn't care about being nice. She wanted to play something true. She let her hands drop onto the keys. The first notes weren't loud, but they were piercing. A bright, clear chord that rang out like a bell in a church tower. As the sound vibrated through the piano and into the bench, Maya felt a surge of electricity go through her body. The connection was made. The piano was no longer wood and wire. It was an extension of her arms. The darkness around her didn't feel empty anymore. It was filled with sound. She didn't need to see the sheet music. The music was flowing through her, coming from a place inside that had no eyes. The first few measures of the waltz began to trickle out, a gentle, lilting rhythm that seemed to sway the very air in the room. Maya's face relaxed, her expression softening into a look of deep concentration and peace. She wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She wasn't thinking about being blind. She was just walking through the music, letting it lead her step by step into the light. The moment her fingers actually pressed down, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't a slow change. It was like a switch being flipped. The first notes of the second waltz rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the dusty silence of the hall like a knife. The sound was big and full, much bigger than such a small girl should be able to make. It seemed to bounce off the high ceiling and the hard floor, wrapping around the audience immediately. Maya didn't hold back. Sometimes when children play, they are timid, afraid of making a mistake, so the sound comes out tiny and weak. But Maya played with a surprising strength. Her left hand jumped to the lower keys, establishing the rhythm. Impapa, impapa. It was the heartbeat of the waltz, steady and strong. She felt the vibration of the deep notes travel up through the bench and into her legs. It was a comforting thumping, like a giant's footsteps, and it grounded her. She didn't have to count the beats anymore. She could just feel them. Then her right hand began to dance. The melody started to flow, light and playful at first, then spinning faster. To anyone watching, it looked like magic. Her fingers, which had been trembling slightly in her lap just minutes before, were now sure and confident. They knew exactly where to go. They moved with a speed that was hard to follow, jumping from one end of the keyboard to the other without a single mistake. She didn't need to look to see if her fingers were lined up with the keys. She had done this 1,000 times in the dark of her living room. Her hands just knew. As the music grew, Maya began to move with it. She wasn't a stiff statue sitting on a bench anymore. She swayed from side to side, her body leaning into the music. When the melody went high and light, her head tilted up. Her face turned toward the ceiling as if she was listening to a voice coming from the sky. When the rhythm got heavy and serious, her shoulders dipped slightly, following the motion. She looked like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. Or perhaps she was just being conducted by the music itself. Inside her mind, the world was exploding with colors. Maya didn't see the dark hall or the bright lights. She saw the music. The second waltz wasn't just sound to her. It was a painting that was changing every second. The fast-running notes were ribbons of gold and bright yellow that spun through the air. The deep, heavy bass notes were blocks of dark purple and blue that sat firmly under her feet. The melody was a voice, sometimes happy and laughing, sometimes sad and whispering. She was following these colors, letting them pull her along. She wasn't thinking about which note came next. She was just riding the wave. The piece is tricky because it changes moods quickly. One minute it is serious and slow, like a soldier marching, and the next minute it is fast and silly, like a child playing tag. Maya handled these changes perfectly. When the music slowed down, she softened her touch, her fingers barely kissing the keys, making the sound gentle and whispery. The audience leaned forward in their seats, straining to hear the soft, delicate notes. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, afraid that if they breathed too loud, they would break the spell. Then, suddenly, the rhythm would speed up. Maya's hands would fly across the keyboard, becoming a blur of motion. The sound became a rushing river, loud and powerful. She hit the keys with a little more force, enjoying the loudness of it. She liked the feeling of the piano fighting back against her fingers. She liked feeling the energy of the instrument. It was her way of shouting without using her voice. She couldn't see the people, but she could feel their attention. It was like a heat that was focused on her. She knew they were surprised. She knew they were thinking, how is she doing that? There is a unique kind of freedom in playing without sight. Maya didn't have to worry about what she looked like. She didn't have to worry about staring at the sheet music and forgetting a note. She was free to close her eyes tight, which she did behind her glasses, and just listen. She was inside the song. The music was a safe place where she could see everything perfectly. In this world, she wasn't a blind girl needing help to cross the street. She was the queen. She controlled the sound, the speed, and the mood. Every note she played was a brick in the castle she was building around herself as she played the more complicated part of the waltz. The middle section, where the melody weaves in and out, a small smile appeared on her face. It wasn't a big grin, but a soft, secret smile. It was the look of someone who knows a secret that no one else knows. She could feel the patterns in the music, the way the notes fit together like puzzle pieces. When her hands had to cross over each other, stretching to reach the far ends of the keyboard, she didn't hesitate. She stretched her fingers out, reaching for the notes, trusting that they would be there. And they always were. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the hall. It chased away the shadows and the dust. It made the cold air feel warm. The people sitting in the back rows, who had been whispering and looking at their phones when she walked out, were now completely still. The music demanded their attention. It was too strong to ignore. It was pulling them into Maya's world, a world where nothing mattered but the rhythm and the melody. Maya's feet worked the pedals below her. She pressed the sustain pedal down, letting the notes blend together into a wash of sound, then lifted it up to make the notes crisp and short. Ding, ding, ding. She did this without thinking about it. Her feet moved just as instinctively as her hands. She was connected to the piano from her head all the way down to her toes. She was one with the instrument. She played on, lost in the colors and the rhythm. She wasn't rushing, even though the song is fast. She played it at exactly the right speed, confident and calm. The music swelled and grew, getting louder and more intense. She was building up to the biggest part of the song, the part where the piano really sings. She took a deep breath, feeling the energy gathering in her shoulders, and then she let it out through her fingers. The sound poured out of her, clear and beautiful, echoing off the walls and filling the silence with joy. She wasn't just pressing keys anymore. She was painting the darkness with light. As the music moved past the halfway point, something truly special began to happen in the room. It wasn't a sudden change that happened all at once, but rather a slow, spreading wave that washed over the crowd. At the start of the performance, there had been distractions. A man in the fifth row had been looking at his watch, wondering how long the show would take. A teenager near the back had been quietly whispering to a friend, trying not to laugh. A mother in the front was busy opening a crinkly bag of crackers for a toddler. But now, all those little everyday noises had completely disappeared. The silence that filled the hall was different from the polite quiet that usually happens when someone walks on stage. This was a heavy, awestruck silence. It was the kind of silence you only hear when something truly magical is taking place. People realize that they are witnessing a moment they will want to remember. It felt like the air itself had become thicker, charged with electricity. The man with the watch stopped checking the time. His hand dropped to his lap, and his mouth opened slightly. He stopped worrying about being late for dinner and just stared. The music wasn't just sound to him anymore. It was telling a story. He found himself leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees, completely captivated by the small girl in the blue dress. He forgot about his job, his bills, and his busy schedule. For these few minutes, there was nowhere else he needed to be. Near the back, the teenager stopped whispering. The joke he was about to tell died on his lips. He looked up at the stage, really looking for the first time. He saw Maya swaying with the music, her hands flying across the keys with impossible speed. He realized that this wasn't just a kid playing a song she memorized. This was someone pouring their heart out. He felt a strange lump in his throat, a feeling of respect that he didn't expect to have that day. He took his phone, which was in his hand, and lowered it to his knee. He didn't want to record it anymore. He just wanted to be there in the moment, to listen. The mother with the toddler froze. The child who had been squirming and fussing suddenly went still too. It was as if even the young child understood that something serious and beautiful was happening. The crackers were forgotten. The mother wrapped her arm around her child, watching Maya with soft eyes. She saw how focused Maya was, how her face glowed with happiness, even though her eyes were hidden behind dark glasses. It made the mother think about her own child, about the innocence and purity of childhood. Hundreds of people, all strangers to each other, were suddenly connected. They were no longer a bored audience waiting for the next act. They were a community of listeners, united by the music. They looked at each other occasionally, exchanging quick glances that said, "Can you believe this? Or do you hear that?" It was a shared experience of wonder. The barriers between them made background. Status seemed to melt away in the face of such pure talent and emotion. Maya, of course, couldn't see any of this. She had no idea that the businessman had put away his phone. She didn't know that the teenager was listening with tears in his eyes. She couldn't see the hundreds of faces staring at her with soft expressions. But in a way, she could feel it. She could feel the energy in the room changing. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of attention. It felt like a warm breeze blowing against her face. She could sense that the crowd was with her, traveling through the music right alongside her, the music she was playing. The second waltz has a way of tugging at the heartstrings. It is happy, but there is a deepness to it, a kind of sadness that makes the beauty stand out even more. As Maya played the slower, more emotional parts of the song, the room seemed to dim, even though the lights were bright. People held their breath without meaning to. It felt like the hall had turned into a church or a sacred place. The sound of the piano was so clear and expressive that it seemed to be speaking directly to each person there, reminding them of their own memories, their own joys, and their own sorrows. There was no coughing, no shuffling of feet, no whispering. The only sounds were the notes coming from the piano and the soft creak of the bench as Maya moved. The silence was so deep that when Maya hit a particularly high, ringing note, it seemed to hang in the air forever, vibrating against the walls before fading away. It was a fragile moment, like holding a soap bubble in your hand. Afraid it might pop, the piano teacher from the local music school, who was sitting in the front row with her arms crossed, looked at Maya's hands. She had been ready to critique the performance, to look for mistakes in technique or timing. But now, her arms dropped to her sides. She forgot all about the rules of music. She saw that Maya wasn't just playing the right notes. She was feeling them. The teacher realized that this girl, who had never seen a sheet of music with her eyes, understood the soul of the song better than many adults who had been playing for decades. It was a humbling moment for her, a reminder that true art comes from the heart. It's not just from practice. In the middle of the room, an elderly man sat with his eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping. He was letting the music wash over him. He had lost his wife a year ago, and the waltz reminded him of dancing with her when they were young. The melody brought back memories of a dance hall, the smell of her perfume, and the feeling of her hand in his. A single tear rolled down his cheek, catching the light. He didn't wipe it away. The music was a gift to him. A brief moment where he could be with her again in his memories. The power of the moment was overwhelming. It wasn't just because Maya was blind, though that added a layer of miracle to it. It was because she played with such honesty. She had nothing to hide behind. She wasn't putting on a show to impress people. She was sharing a piece of herself. And the crowd, in their silence, was accepting that gift with the respect it deserved. They were protecting the moment, keeping it sacred with their quietness, as the song built up towards its final, powerful climax. The anticipation in the room was almost too much to bear. The collective heartbeat of the audience seemed to speed up. Maya's hands were moving faster now, the notes cascading down like a waterfall. The people sitting in the front rows could feel the vibrations of the piano and the floorboards. It was a physical force, shaking them gently. Everyone knew the song was coming to an end soon. They didn't want it to stop. They wanted to stay in this bubble where the only thing that mattered was the music. They could feel the sadness of the ending approaching, but also the beauty of it. The silence was no longer just a lack of noise. It was a presence. It was a witness to the miracle of a 9-year-old girl who had turned a dark, dusty hall into a place of light just by using her hands and her heart. They were mesmerized. completely under the spell of the second waltz, waiting breathlessly for the final chord to fall. The music was rushing toward its end now. Maya's hands were moving across the keys with a speed that made them look like they were flying. The second waltz has a part near the end where the music seems to spin faster and faster, like a dancer twirling until they are dizzy. Maya threw herself into this part. She wasn't holding anything back. She let the rhythm take her, swaying her body deeply to the left and then to the right. Her face was turned up toward the lights, her expression full of intense joy and concentration. To her, the colors in her mind were swirling together, a bright mix of gold, blue, and fiery orange. She felt like she was flying. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The rushing notes suddenly stopped. There was a brief, heart-stopping pause in the music. It was just a split second of silence, but it felt like a long time. Maya's hands lifted high above the keyboard. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The air was so still you could almost hear the dust motes settling. Then she brought her hands down hard on the final chords. Bom, bom. The sound was huge. It rang out loud and clear, echoing off the high ceiling and the walls. It was a strong, solid sound that seemed to shake the floorboards. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating and deep. It was the end of the story, the closing of a beautiful book. Maya kept her hands pressed down on the keys, feeling the wood vibrate under her palms. She didn't move. She just sat there, letting the sound fade away slowly, soaking in the last rumbles of the music as they disappeared into the rafters. For a few seconds after the sound stopped, the room remained perfectly silent. It was that strange, heavy silence that happens after something truly amazing occurs. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody whispered. It was as if the audience was frozen in time, processing what they had just heard. They were all thinking the same thing. Asterisk? Did that really just happen? The magic of the moment was still hovering over them, and no one wanted to be the first one to break the spell. Then, a sound came from the back of the room. It was the sharp sound of a single person clapping. It broke the trance. Immediately, the whole hall erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was an explosion. The quiet was shattered by a roar of applause. It started as a wave of noise and grew louder and louder until the walls seemed to shake. People were cheering, whistling, and shouting bravo. It was a chaotic, wonderful noise. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they had just witnessed a miracle. Maya sat on the bench, her hands now resting in her lap. Her chest was heaving up and down. She was breathing hard, partly from the effort of playing and partly from the rush of adrenaline. She couldn't see the hundreds of people jumping to their feet. She couldn't see the tears in the eyes of the elderly man in the third row or the wide smile on the teenager's face. But she didn't need to see them to know what was happening. She could feel it. The applause wasn't just sound to her. It was a physical force. She could feel the vibrations of the clapping traveling through the floor and up the legs of the piano bench. It felt like a gentle drumming against her back. The roar of the voices washed over her like a warm ocean wave. It was a completely overwhelming sensation. It was loud, yes, but it wasn't scary. It felt warm and welcoming. It felt like a giant hug. She turned her head slightly, angling her ear toward the crowd, a look of wonder on her face. She was drinking in the love that was being thrown at her. She realized that they weren't clapping just because she was blind. They were clapping because she played beautifully. The mother of the teenager was crying openly now, wiping her eyes with a tissue. The businessman who had checked his watch earlier was now standing at the back of the room, clapping his hands together until they stung, a look of pure admiration on his face. The music teacher in the front row was shaking her head in disbelief. A huge smile plastered across her face. Every single person in that hall was on their feet. The standing ovation was spontaneous and genuine. It wasn't the kind of applause you give because you feel obligated. It was the kind you give because your heart is too full to stay seated. Maya slowly stood up from the bench. She smoothed down her blue dress again, a nervous habit returning now that the music was over. She felt a little shaky in her legs, like she had just run a long race. She bowed her head forward slightly, a simple gesture of thanks. She didn't know exactly where people were standing. She just bowed to the room in general. When she lifted her head again, her face changed. The serious, focused look of the musician was gone. In its place was a bright, beaming smile. It was a smile that lit up her whole face. It was the smile of a 9-year-old girl who knew she had done something good. Her cheeks turned pink with happiness. She felt proud. Not the kind of pride that makes you boastful, but a deep, quiet satisfaction in her chest. She had gone out into the dark, faced the scary unknown, and conquered it. She turned around carefully to feel her way back to the side of the stage. But the applause got even louder as she moved. People didn't want her to go. They wanted to keep her there. They wanted to look at her a little longer. It was as if her presence on the stage gave them hope. She proved to them that even if life is dark and difficult, you can still create something beautiful. Maya's mother was waiting just off stage, right where she had promised she would be. As soon as Maya stepped into the shadows of the wings, her mother wrapped her up in a tight hug. She didn't say anything at first. She just held her daughter close. Tears were running down the mother's face, too. She squeezed Maya tight, feeling the smallness of her body and the rapid beating of her heart. "You did it," the mother whispered into Maya's hair. "You were amazing." "I heard them, Mom," Maya whispered back, her voice trembling with emotion. "I heard them clapping. It was loud." "Yes, baby." Her mother laughed softly through her tears. "It was very loud. They loved you." Okay. Back on stage, the applause was finally starting to slow down, but people were still standing. The lights on the piano were still shining, reflecting off the black wood. The room felt different now. It wasn't just a dusty old hall anymore. It was a place where a memory had been made. The people in the audience began to slowly shuffle out, but they were talking excitedly. They weren't checking their phones or looking at their watches. They were talking to each other, reliving the music, trying to describe the feeling they had. They walked out into the cold evening air, but they felt warm inside. They carried the music with them. It was a reminder that talent doesn't come from what you see, but from what you feel. It was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the darkest places. And for Maya, as she walked away holding her mother's hand, the world didn't seem so big or scary anymore. She knew that no matter how dark it got, she always had her music to light the way. And for a few minutes, she had let everyone else see that light too.